Welcome, brother and sister pastors, to Rooted the Podcast. Welcome to any of you who have tuned in who are not pastors, because you are most welcome. So many of the topics that we deal with are topics that will certainly apply to all of our lives, not just the lives of pastors. So I'm going to deal today with one of the topics that someone has sent in that they wondered if I could talk about. I'm going to give you what I have on this one. It's one that's near to my heart because I wrestled with it for 35, 40 years in ministry, more so when I was a younger pastor, but still to this day because I'm a human being. And that is, what do you do when you've disappointed someone? This young brother who I've gotten to know a little bit and love him already, he's so gifted, such a good heart. He says, how do you know when criticism that you're receiving is valid and what criticism might be toxic? And where do you draw boundaries on understanding who you can help with that particular criticism they have and respond to, and where you just can't. You just need to let it go. Several things just come to my heart and gut, and let me just share them with you, and you can sort them out in your particular journey. First of all, Jesus said, "Beware when all speak well of you." He was implying that just to live out of our own journeys, our own bodies, our own personalities, the gifting that we have received in a broken world where people respond to concepts and things out of their own pain, as well as maybe sometimes validly seeing some things in us that could improve. If you're going to be authentic and free, somebody is going to criticize you at some point. And if you don't receive any criticism, I think he's saying beware. What does that betray? Could it be that we're hiding behind an idol in our lives that could be basically this lust for everyone liking us? We need to protect self and protect our egos to the point that we just don't want to deal with any criticism, and so basically we don't press the boundaries. We don't go to the Russian front, if you will, of the spiritual battle, because that may be a place where we have to take some hits, and so we kind of stay safe, doing things in a way that we think will make everyone happy. I will tell you, I got a quote that somebody gave me early on in ministry. It goes something like this: "I'm not sure how to tell you to succeed, but I can tell you for sure how to fail, and that is try to please everyone." So at first, we just have to let go. Jesus said we will receive criticism if we're ministering, even in a very healthy way. And secondly, we've got to let go of the myth that somehow to be successful is not to be criticized. You compromise too much of yourself. You walk too carefully with paranoia, and that's not the way Jesus has called us to pastor. So can't tell you how to succeed, but I can tell you how to fail. Try to please everyone. Here's another thought. Whenever someone says from outside me, and I learned this from a therapist friend of mine who was my counselor, the closest thing to a mentor that I've ever had, actually. She said this to me years ago. She said, something outside of you, as you grow, Kev, she said, and your identity of who you really are, will now be able to tell you on the inside of you who you are. So over the years, I've learned to say, when I receive words of criticism, these words don't get to define me. These words from another human being. This is before I even evaluate whether there's something in these words that are valid for me. I remind myself these words do not get to define me, who I am, because I'm defined by the voice of my Heavenly Father, who calls me his beloved Son. Let me say that again. First response when criticism comes our way, when that first defensiveness starts to come up in our spirit. Wait, these words from outside me, they may have something to teach me, and that's fair enough. But first, let me remind myself, these words do not get to define me, because I'm defined by the voice of my Father, who calls me his beloved Son. I think it was Thomas Merton who said, "Who am I? I am one loved by God. All other identities are an illusion." So it's so important that we know who we are as a son of God in Jesus Christ. That's the definitive. We may have done something not mature. We may have spoken in a way that elicited just criticism, but we must not let it go to the core of our identity, because then we can't even deal with that human being. We can't deal with what might be there for us to learn. We can't deal with what might have come out of them in a dysfunctional way, because all of a sudden we are shaken to our core by those words. So I'd start there. Where do I take my cues about who I am? And let me remind myself that my Father, even in this moment of criticism, is whispering to me, you are my beloved Son, and I've got you. Abide in my love. Stay present in my love. Be rooted and grounded in my love. So that now I can look at these words of criticism and see what they might have to say to me. So for me, the next thought might be secure in who I am. So I can now, in a secure place, look at those words of criticism and say, all right, what are they saying, and why are they saying what they're saying? And this is what I would ask myself. What of the thought, this critical thought, what of the thoughts of this human being who decided they needed to speak words of criticism to me, no matter how dysfunctionally or lacking love they came to me with? In other words, no matter how poorly they were delivered and out of what motive they were delivered, is there anything in what these words speak to me of criticism that might be true, that I can grow from? I can remember after I got let go at my second church after 14 amazing years. I think they were amazing years. There were mistakes made, of course, but at the very end, a couple of my staff came to me. One in particular I can remember, he said something to me like, sometimes, Kev, you can be a bully. And I remember thinking back in the day, you don't know what you're talking about. In fact, here was my response. I wasn't very centered in my identity. I was like, that guy's a wimp. The reason he said that is because he just didn't have the guts to come and confront me like he needed to. And then, over the years, I started taking a look at the Enneagram, finding out that I'm an 8. So I have much courage to speak much truth. Fear is not one of the things that I wrestle with very, very much, as I've shared on other podcasts. But if I am not, to use Enneagram language, if I'm not fully integrated, to use spiritual language, if I'm not surrendered to Christ, an 8 can be a bully. An 8 can be a bully and not realize how their words, their presence, their demeanor, their passion, because 8s are passionate about everything. If they're involved with something, they're passionate about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be involved with it. We can become a bully. I didn't want to hear that back in the day. Today, I wish I would have been a bit more grounded in my identity, so I could have said, what of this might be true? Now, they may have issues themselves. Maybe they did need to be more forthright in their relationship with me. Fair enough. But we're not talking about them now. I'm talking about what of those words that are spoken to me could possibly be true. I had another sister later on in my third church, a very wounded sister. I might say in some ways, I'll just leave it at that. Very, very wounded. She said to me, you've been wounded by your last church, and until you deal with some of those wounds, you're not going to be as free in your ministry as you need to be. And I was like, you know what? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I've dealt with all those wounds, and I'm doing just fine, and blah, blah. Over the years, after she, I forget how it all went down, but she left the church, or we set a boundary or something about her in our community, because she did have some significant issues that were causing real havoc, and we just needed to set a boundary. But I think she had something to say to me. I've done some deeper healing. I think she saw something that I couldn't hear because she was so dysfunctional. And so I want to say, grounded in your identity, take a moment to see if there's something that is in that criticism that, even if it has been given in a dysfunctional way from a dysfunctional person, God might use to somehow deepen and refine you. And then just a couple more quick thoughts. Some criticism is going to be given in a dysfunctional, demanding way. And you've done the work of saying, what of this is really about me? that I can take in and maybe grow from. And you've gotten to the point where you say, all right, I've taken that, but there's so much other baggage here. At that point, then you put to rest the criticism itself. And in my opinion, if you're still called to minister to that human being, then you sit with them, and your focus from that point on is not the content of what they said to you, it's them and their pain that might have generated that content. So as you sit with them one day, you might say, thank you for what you shared. I've really taken that into my heart, and I'm working on some of that stuff. I've taken that before the Lord. I've talked to a couple of close confidants. Thank you. Now, can I just ask you, what's going on with you? There was something going on with you as you came toward me with that particular piece of criticism. Can we just talk together? You're in a safe place here. What's going on with you? And see if they will, because you've been willing to receive their criticism, grounded in your own identity. You've done some work on whether anything they had to say was true, whether delivered dysfunctionally or not. It might help them to feel loved and feel safe enough that maybe they can get to some of the pain, some of their own mess that produced that mostly undue criticism to begin with. You have to stay very present to yourself and who you are in Christ to be able to get to that point with some folk. I will say this, I rarely would respond to threats. If someone was willing to sit with me in dialogue, I would sit. But if someone said to me, this is you, who you are, blah, 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 and if you don't change this, and this, I'm out. Well, early on, I used to think, if they'll just hear me out, if that kind of person who is in so much pain that they're going to threaten me, if they'll just hear me out, I can talk them out of their mess, and I can help them see my perspective. You know what, my brothers and sisters? I don't believe that anymore. So at some points, I think we have to have enough of a check in our spirit about some levels of dysfunction, especially if they come out in a threat. If you don't change, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, if you don't really do what I want you to do, I'm gone. Then I think at that point, grounded in your own identity so that you can love them back. Say, you know what? I'm uncomfortable with your threat. And if you want a dialogue, I'm willing. But if you're going to threaten me, that's not a place where we can both grow and learn. It doesn't feel like Christ to me. So no, we're not going to talk. That'll be a hard thing for you to do, but I think sometimes it's necessary. And then finally and lastly, at the end of a process of being criticized and dealing with all of what we just talked about, at a certain point, it seems to me that we've just got to surrender the criticism. At some point, I have to say, Father, I've done work with this criticism. I've done the best I could, and I'm just turning it over to you now. I don't know how this is going to work out. I don't know if this person's going to stay in the church, if they're going to make trouble. I don't know. But I can't live today with this criticism hanging over my shoulder. I can learn from it. I can try to assimilate what you might teach me through it. I've tried to help this brother or sister with their own pain. And now I've got to let it go. I've got to put it in your hands, because there's a whole lot of bleeding out sheep out here. And there's a community where the powers of darkness are literally taking over great pieces of ground for their kingdom. And I can't sit around mulling over any more about this criticism. I have to surrender it to you. And as you know, in ministry, that can have to happen 2 or 3 or 4 times a day, if not at least 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. If you are really on the front lines, pouring your heart out with people, you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to receive criticism. These are simply a few of the things that I think have helped me over the years deal with some of that pain that came at me from people that I did not make happy in the moment. So hope it's helpful to you. Would love to get feedback about any of these podcasts. Maybe we could do a part 2 on what do we do when we disappoint people. Much love to you. Please reach out to us through the website, text, phone, email. Let us know how we can come alongside you. In the meanwhile, know that we love you and we're with you all the way home.